And so the things I was going to share with you and that I'll tell you are really the process that we're going to go through over the next 6 to 12 months. So this is a long process, and I'm really excited to see such good turnout at the beginning of this, because usually when we do these kickoff meetings, it's a relatively quiet start to a process that gets involvement as it progresses throughout the 6 to 12 month period. But I'll explain what a reorganization study is. That's the study that we're about to undertake here. I'll talk about the work that we've done and the process that we follow as we go through these kinds of studies so that you understand what that process is. And then we have a little exercise that will actually get you providing us with some input so that as we begin this study, we understand what are some of your hopes for this process, what are the things you'd like to see come out of this process, and then what are some of your concerns about this process. What are you afraid that might come out of this planning process over the next 6 to 12 months, that we can be aware of that fear and try to figure out how to navigate that and be as forthcoming as possible in this process as it unfolds. One of the things I wanted to just kind of say right up front is that for us, there are no predetermined outcomes in a process like this. Everyone, I think, approaches any conversation about their community with some preconceived notions. It's impossible not to, right? If you live in a community, you think certain things about that community. But it's important to note that the reason we're here, I think, is a reflection of the leadership in the community that has decided that to go about a process of looking at reorganization requires some outside opinion and requires a consultant to try to guide that process in a way that has no predetermined outcomes. And so that's what we're here to do today. And so, yeah.
While he's rebooting, just real quick, one of the things that has been brought up that everyone needs to understand is though there have been opinions put out by whether they be members of either of the boards, either of the committees, we're all in agreement that whether you're in favor or not in favor of the consolidation, there's not enough information of what's happening today to make that determination. That's why we're doing what's happening. That's why we're doing the study. The study is what's important, and pretty much both boards, I believe, will be looking to see what the study offers us so we can move forward.
It's rebooting, and while it reboots, I'll get started with the rest of this. But yeah, I reiterate that. Sure, that's good. Why don't we stand and we'll all do the Pledge of the Allegiance. There's the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And it also gave me time to fix it, so that's perfect. So the mayor was kind enough to introduce me, and that was one of the first things I was going to do. Rondout Consulting is my firm. For the last 10 years, I've been working in municipal reorganization studies a lot like this one throughout New York State, and also I do work with not-for-profit organizations that are also going through the process of restructuring or reorganizing. And so for this particular project, I am working with Fairweather Consulting. Fairweather Consulting is another firm that does this work. I'm out of Kingston, New York. Fairweather Consulting is New Paltz, New York. My brother, Richard Wiedemann, is also a member of Rondout Consulting, and so he's involved in this study process with us. Peter couldn't be here today. Unfortunately, he had a conflict, so we will introduce him at a future public meeting, and you'll have a chance to meet him then. Introductions out of the way, I'll explain what is a local government reorganization study. I'll explain how the study is being paid for. That's usually an important question to answer from the get-go. I'll talk about the study process. I mentioned that. What do we do in a study like this? And then I'll explain how you all can stay involved over the course of that 6 to 12 month period that the project unfolds over. There's a lot of different ways, including a website and future public meetings. I'll try to talk slowly too so I can be picked up. Okay, good. A little bit more about our firms. Rondout Consulting is the lead consultant for this, so we're the ones that are under contract with the village to perform this project, and Fairweather Consulting is our subcontractor. And so Peter from Fairweather Consulting has really been doing this for about as long as the modern kind of process of local government reorganization has been happening in New York State. He's a real expert in this, and so we're glad to have him as kind of an advisor, especially around legal matters about reorganization. There are legal questions about this that come up. So what is a local government reorganization study? You know, this is a process that tries to envision what the future of Highland Falls as a local government would look like. And it tries to do it rather than in a reactive way where people, you know, are kind of angry about something and are trying to change the way that their local government is structured in result or as a basis, on the basis of that anger. We're instead trying to do it in a way that is consultative, that you all have some input in, can share that input. We can work with the committee and study this process and come up with the answers to the questions that may not have answers right now. So, you know, instead of having the pitchforks and the torches, we hope to have your comments, your questions, your criticisms are welcome, but we hope to have a dialogue over the course of this study. So, a little bit more in detail about what it is. A study like this looks primarily at the services that are provided by a municipality. This is really about the services that the village and the town provide, and it's about looking at the quality of those services, the cost of those services, and really understanding in great detail what those services actually look like. In a lot of cases, reorganization studies or shared services studies start from a presumption that because a town has a planning department and a village maybe has a planning department, that they're the same thing and that it's a duplication automatically. That's not true for anyone who really knows the municipalities and their services. There really are very few of those duplications, and in fact, usually services are provided in a different way or to a different population when they exist in multiple municipalities. So that's a part of what we need to do here. And then as we identify those services, we need to ask the question of what are the other ways than what's currently in place that those municipal services could be provided. And so that's kind of the heart of this, is identifying creatively, in some cases, what are other ways that those services could be provided. And, you know, again, because this is a study, that is a question that's asked with all innocence in the beginning. It's a legitimate study question of what are the options. And then the study progresses to looking at what the impact of those options would be. Because just because an option exists doesn't mean it's a good idea. And so I think that's part of this process, is identifying the options and then trying to assess whether or not any of those options are actually good ideas. And good ideas means looking at a lot of different things. We'll talk in a second about the important goals of the study having to do with cost reductions and maintenance or improvement of quality of services. But it's more than that. There's questions about local control over services. You know, how does that affected by the implementation of any changes to the way that services are provided? It's about municipal employees, too, that municipal employees matter in this process, and it's important to identify the impacts on municipal employees. And it's about a sense of community and a sense of identity that sometimes I think people have a reaction immediately of fear that somehow a process like this could take away the identity of their community. And I think that that's a legitimate concern for us to be aware of, and I hope during our exercise in a minute here that if people feel that way, they'll share that thought, and then to take that into consideration as we explore the options for reorganization. So this diagram is hard to see from back there, but we're going to show it again in the future because this is a diagram that we actually put together as we proposed our approach to this study to the village. And it really tries to identify that a study like this is about a lot of different things. There's at least 3 different goals in a study like this. There isn't one single goal, there's 3 different goals. The 2 that are most familiar is a balancing of trying to find ways to reduce the cost of local government, because as taxpayers, we all pay that cost of local government. But it's also important to recognize that it's not just about cost reduction. There are important services provided. How do we maintain the quality of those services or enhance the quality if there's an opportunity to make them better? But then it's a third part to this, because that isn't something that happens in a vacuum. There needs to be a conversation like we'll have today and like we'll have it 3 other times in the study process with the community to try to identify what are the trade-offs in that. What's important to the community, and how do we make sure that the options that come out of this and the evaluation of those options reflects that. So a little bit about the funding source for this project, which is important from a variety of standpoints, not just because it's what pays us consultants to do the work, but because it's an important guide in what we need to do with this project in order to meet the requirements of the grant funders for the project. So the project is funded with a Citizens Reorganization Empowerment Grant. This is a grant program through the New York State Department of State. I know that there's a local rep. His name is Carl Olblocker. He wasn't able to be here tonight, but he may be here at some of our future meetings, and he's kind of the local DOS rep that oversees these projects. So you may see him at a future meeting. The grant requires an initial 50% local match, which means it's kind of dollar for dollar local money and then the DOS grant. But the nice thing and the incentive that the Department of State builds into this process is that if we make some recommendations and then the communities implement those recommendations, they can get back some of that match, and it actually becomes only a 10% match. So that's an important factor here, is that we're trying to come up with options that the community can actually implement in order to try to recoup some of that match that they're having to put out in the beginning stages of this project.
Does it have to be one out of all the suggestions, or is it you have to take all the suggestions?
It doesn't have to be all of them, but it has to be specific kinds of options.
Percentage?
Say again? No, it's not a percentage either. It's a specific set of kinds of options that can be implemented. So if we just said, look, we're gonna paint different colors on a car or something like that, that wouldn't be enough. But it has to be a substantial commitment by the municipalities. And we'll go through that. As we start identifying options, we'll start talking about which ones of them will actually allow the village to recoup that match. And so, it's also very important to note, and I think, this is a conversation that we've had as a committee, and I would imagine that it's a conversation that's happening in the community. Well, what exactly is this study looking at? Is it looking at police? Is it looking at DPW? Is it looking at other services in the municipality? The answer is yes to all of that. The grant that the village received is a grant through a program that looks at local government reorganization. Not any specific service necessarily, but reorganization municipality-wide. And so that's an important point that we want to make, and I'll explain as we go through the process that we're going to do in the next 6 to 12 months. This is a local government reorganization study. We're going to look at options like consolidation, dissolution, the super town concept, as some people call it, which is a coterminous town village. These are the options that in the grand scheme of things we need to include in order to satisfy the grant requirements. In the process of looking at those kind of overarching municipal reorganization options, we're going to look at each service that the municipality provides. Because really, in the end, the questions that come up when you think about a thing like village dissolution or a super town are really questions about, well, who's going to do garbage pickup? Or who's going to plow my streets? Or who's going to patrol the village area with a police presence? Those are all service questions. And so we address this from a service standpoint, get all those services understood, figure out what would happen to them if the village consolidated, dissolved, or became a super village. So that allows us to look in great detail at police and DPW, which are two services in most communities that consume a large portion of the budget. They're very visible, they're very important. So these are services that we feel are important for us to look at, and we'll look at in the context of that greater municipal reorganization. Timeline. Just to say, we've built out the timeline to take us all the way through the year. As I said, at the far end, it's 12 months. Most of what, is kind of the public interaction stuff will happen in the next 6 to 9 months, and then we have some closeout stuff that we have to do at the end of the project. And so before we close today, I'll mention that there are 3 other public meetings that are scheduled throughout that time frame. So as we get a little bit more material, we'll meet again and share that material with you, get your feedback. We'll do that again, and then we'll have a final public meeting at the end to kind of review where we've been, what we've come up with through this whole study. So these are boring and too detailed, so I'll be quick. The process here is one that, again, we've done in a lot of communities. We had conversations with the steering committee, even right at the very beginning, about how to make sure that this works here in Highland Falls. And so it's a little different than the way we would normally do it, and I'll explain that in a second. But the first thing is really basic. It's us coming here tonight, having a kickoff meeting with the steering committee, setting up a project website, and really just getting the process underway. So that's where we are right now. Don't feel like you've missed a whole lot, because it's really just getting started. The next step in this process, and this is tiny, but the way we've broken this up is to look at service reorganization first. So we're having a committee conversation in March at our next committee meeting of what are the municipal services that are provided in the town and the village. We're going to have interviews with department heads, in particular looking at police and DPW to start with. We're going to gather budget data. We're going to do all that kind of stuff in order to identify the services and start to evaluate options for reorganization of those services. There are some seats up here. Don't be afraid. Okay. So service reorganization is the first thing we're going to look at. And we're going to focus on police and DPW as kind of big ticket, important services. We'll identify some options for how those services could be reorganized, and that means everything from, look, do it all the same, but maybe expand some of your mutual aid, something simple like that. Maybe do some shared training, or maybe try to coordinate dispatch, or individual service-related things, all the way up to what are some options that are bigger, that involve consolidating the departments, merging the departments, changing the structure of the departments in some bigger way. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to identify as options and then start to evaluate. Then, as we finish that, we do a similar process with all of the other services in the municipalities, and that's the municipal reorganization part of the study. And so again, it's identifying those options for municipal reorganization, which I can tell you up front, there are not all that many in New York State law that are allowed, so it's going to involve dissolution as one of the options that we look at, consolidation, and the idea of a coterminous town village. Those are three that I'm sure will be in that part of the process that we'll look at. So after we look at both the service and the municipal level, then we'll put it all together in a final reorganization study and plan. And importantly, the plan part there is designed to guide the communities through whatever steps they choose, as the mayor said, at the board level, whatever the boards choose to advance to the next stage. If they want to implement something, we'll have a plan that walks them through the steps to do that. And then at the end, there's a public hearing, so it's kind of a formal chance for us to have, public input and public feedback, public comment on the process that's unfolded. And then we do all the grant paperwork. So this, again, will be up on the website, and we actually have a calendar. I'll show you, and there's a slide that shows a little picture of it, of the calendar that's on the website. But just quickly, we've got study steering committee meetings. These are working meetings of the steering committee. We meet on the second Thursdays at 7 p.m. at Village Hall. And that's the meetings where we do a bunch of work, we get it to the steering committee, and we sit down and we talk about it and go through it, get the steering committee's feedback, some guidance, kind of hash through this stuff as we work through the project. We have today's public kickoff meeting. Oh, I'll back up for a second. Those meetings are open to the public. We are working meetings, so they're structured differently than this one. It's not a presentation to the public. It's a presentation to the committee so that we can work on stuff. But they're open to the public if somebody wants to attend and listen. Then we've got the public meetings, which are today, our kickoff meeting. We'll have a presentation of the draft service reorganization study. That'll probably be in late April, early May. And then we have a presentation of the draft municipal reorganization study. That'll probably be about September. And then we have the public hearing in November. Okay? And we'll be announcing all those, and you'll see them in the same ways that you heard about tonight's meeting, I would assume. So quickly, other ways to provide input. The public meetings are a good way to come, share your thoughts, ask questions, learn more about what's going on with the study. But the project website is available all the time. There's a link to this, I think, already on the village and the town's websites. So if you don't want to write down the long URL, you can go there and look for the link that's on the village and town websites. But the URL is up there. Note there's no www. So if you're going to it and you're putting a www, it probably won't take you there. It's just highlandfalls.rondauconsulting.com. And so there's a little screenshot there of the homepage, gives a little welcome and an orientation to what's on the website. There's lots of links to project documents. There's relatively little there now because we're just getting started, but there's some background documents that explain a little bit of what I've been talking about. What is local government reorganization? There's some examples from other communities. That kind of stuff is up there now. And then as we produce documents for the steering committee, they will go up on the website as well. The calendar is up there too. It's on the homepage, and then there's a separate page for it as well. And so all of the meetings, including tonight and the study steering committee meetings, they are all up on that calendar. So if you're thinking you heard about something coming up and you want to verify it, you can go to the project website and you can check the calendar there. As well, if you click on one of the meetings, so can't demonstrate that right now, but if you click on the study steering committee link there in red on the left, it takes you to a detailed page, and then if there are documents related to that meeting, like this presentation for this meeting, they'll be available there for you to download. There's also some forms that are on the website. So there's a question form if you just have a general question. If we get enough of those, we'll compile a frequently asked questions document, which can be helpful. We don't always get a lot of questions through the website, so if we don't, we'll just kind of take them as they come and we'll discuss them with the committee. There's also just a general contact form. If you just want to contact us, reach out to us, you can use that form as well. And then whatever does get submitted through there, we will bring back to the steering committee and discuss during the monthly steering committee meetings. Okay, my voice is tired, and good timing because now it's time for you all to go to work. Before I actually get you up and kind of moving and we're going to give you some Post-it notes to jot your thoughts down on, there is a sign-in sheet going around. Has everyone gotten the sign-in sheet? It's very helpful for us, and it's great that there's so many people here. Okay, I'll send it over that way.
Take it out in the hallway as well.
And
There's about 10 people in the hallway.
yeah, okay. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize how many. Well, we're going to start to get input, and so I think those of you in the hallway out there, if you can hear me, we're going to start handing out some Post-it notes. Richard, if you want to grab those pink ones and give me some, I'll help. We're giving you pink Post-it notes, and as you can see up here, if you can see the screen, pink Post-it notes are a way for you to record any concerns you have about this process. So if you're worried about something that might happen or something you've heard about this, this is your chance to share that. Write it down. Try to do one per Post-it note, because otherwise we have trouble reading them. They get small. Do one per Post-it note, and then save your Post-it notes, and at the end here, we're going to actually ask you to get up or hand them to us, and we're going to post them up on the easel here so that at the end of the meeting, if you want to, you can walk around and take a look at what other people said. So you can talk amongst yourselves now. We're going to hand out the Post-it notes, but fill in at least one, if you can, with your concerns about the study, okay? Does anybody need a pencil with their Post-it notes? Okay, I'll bring some of those around too. More Post-its? Who wants more? Pink ones are concerns, and we'll get to hopes in a second, but we'll give you a different color Post-it notes. Oh, comments. Okay, good. That's good. Okay, you want to take one of those and pass those down?
Usually it's freezing up here, so we have heat tonight.
Anybody else pencil? Oh. Don't be shy if you need a pencil, or if you need more Post-its, just raise your hand. Yeah, there are at least 4 seats up front here if somebody wants to come in. Even one has a Post-it already, yes. Okay, take another minute, jot down any other concerns, and then we're going to hand out, while you're doing that, we're going to hand out green Post-its, which you can use to identify your hopes. The colors are kind of gimmicky, but it helps us when we go back through this later to understand if you think something's a hope or a concern. Sometimes it's not always obvious from the comment to us, so hopes. Anybody want a green Post-it down here? Hopes, yeah, green is hopes. They don't have to be, they're just hopes. We'll find out.
World peace.
Yeah, there you go. Anybody else need a green Post-it note? Green? Hopes? Anybody want a green Post-it?
first. Right.
Okay, so because it's really crowded in here, normally we would have you come up and put your Post-it notes on the easel there, but I think we would just have a traffic jam up at the easel. So what I'm going to ask you to do is hold on to them, but before you leave, put them somewhere obvious. Maybe put them on the front, on the table up here or something like that so that we can collect them and use them to kind of record what the comments were. But I also want to point out that we did a similar exercise with the committee at our last committee kickoff meeting, so they're not filling them out because they've had their chance. But we want to hear from you all. So rather than getting you to get up and put them up there, again, make sure we get them. But does anybody have a hope or concern that they just want to share, that they want to get off their chest and tell us about? Yeah, do you want me to try to?
I can speak loud enough.
I'll repeat.
No. It's that it won't pick it up on
pick it
the,
up? All right.
we want this for archives so people can watch it later on the computer.
I would like to know if it's being considered to actually consolidate the town and village totally, and totally get rid of one body of government and one side of services all the way through. Just have one governing body. There's only 6,000 people. It's ridiculous to have two different governing bodies.
Good question, and the answer is yes, that's one of the options that's on the table to consider. Any other hopes, concerns, or just general questions?
I was just wondering, will I still have a job as the chief operator of the wastewater plant in Fort Montgomery?
That's a very good question, and as we mentioned, one of the impacts that we need to look at with any option is what it does to municipal employees. And so as we look at options, that'll be a very clear question and a consideration as we examine the impact of the options.
And my hopes to still have a job as a chief operator.
Well said. Anybody else, a hope or a concern you want to share with the group?
Just a quick one. When during this process will the people of the town and village get to vote?
It depends on the option. Each option has its own process of being actually adopted, and most of the big ones, all of the big ones, involve a vote of some sort. But I'll just give you stuff that may get me into trouble, but this is stuff that's going to come out in the discussions anyhow. So dissolution of a village, which is one of these options that results in the elimination of a level of government, in this case, the village. That is an act of village residents, and so if that option were to ever come to a point where the board or the community has decided it really wants to move ahead with it, it would go to a vote, but it would be a vote of village residents only. That's the way New York State law defines it for a village dissolution. That's why we don't just say dissolution's the only option and then move on, because there are other options that look a little different, they're not called dissolution, that involve a vote of more than just the village residents. But yes, for the major options, if they're advanced, then there would be a vote on them by the residents.
I think you had it as Task 5 or Task 6 sometime during that time frame?
Well, the actual vote, if there is a vote, would likely be after our study is done. Because we would identify, here's an option that is doable, and we'd answer questions like how does it affect municipal employees? We would answer questions about how does it affect taxes? And then on the basis of those answers, the community and most importantly the boards would decide, do we want to actually do this? And if they decided, yes, we want to do this, then at that point it would start its process towards a vote.
Yeah, concern from the seniors, will we lose our local dispatcher or will we have to go to 911? The local dispatchers know the seniors, they know their areas. We don't even have to half the time identify the building that we're going to and who lives there. Also, there's a call-in service that they call in the morning and check, will we lose that? It has saved the lives of a couple of seniors already and expedited help for a couple more.
That has actually already come to our attention, and it's an example of how important it is for us to understand what local services are actually being provided, because not every community has something like that. And so if we were to just swoop in and kind of say, yeah, look, you can get rid of dispatch, we might not understand that that important service is a part of dispatch. So that's something that, as part of this process, we learn stuff like that, and then we're not answering that question in the sense that we're saying, no, that's not a valuable service. We're identifying it as a service, trying to figure out how can we maintain maintain or improve the quality of that service while reducing costs. And if there isn't a good way to do it, then that's what we come out with and say in the end of the process. If there is a way, then we'll try to figure out what that is. But it's good, right now, the most important thing is for us to identify things exactly like that so that we understand those services and people understand what would happen to them if one of the options were implemented. Other questions? Other questions, comments?
I know that it's been talked in the beginning to dissolve the Highland Falls Police Department. I'd like to know on the study who has the credibility of knowing the law enforcement of trying to make a more efficient police department. Are you going to be working with the chief of police with that now? Is it still talk about dissolving the police department, which I hope it isn't because we haven't even gone through the study yet? And I think that's definitely putting the cart before the horse.
Very good questions. And to answer the first one first, we have experience working with police departments, but we are not the police experts. And I think that part of the way that this process works best is if we engage the local staff and the local forces in conversations about what works and what doesn't work. So that's a part of our next step here, is to actually meet with the chief and then to at some point meet with hopefully with the whole staff and talk about what works, what doesn't work. So this is, as much about what do we get from you all and from your input about what could be better and what should be preserved, as it is about us coming in and trying to tell you how to do it. Now, that said, is dissolution of the police department going to be looked at? My answer would be it's going to be looked at, but with not any preconceived notion of whether or not it should actually happen. We're going to evaluate it based on the input from the forces and based on the other factors, employees, the cost, the impact on taxes, whether or not there's any viable options that could actually be
I
implemented.
guess what my question is that dissolution of just the village or the town, or either or?
Right. At this point, there's no option off the table that I'm aware of. So all of those at this point, and as we talk to you all and as we do our investigations and research on this, then we start to identify, and not in some closed sense. We don't just say, oh, look, that one is off the table, no questions about it. We say, look, we think this one is off the table because X, Y, and Z. It wouldn't work from an operational standpoint. It doesn't save any money. It would result in a significant decrease in quality of service. Those are the kinds of things we would say by way of explanation of why any option gets ruled out.
I hope it's carefully reviewed.
Yeah, good. I do too. And I think that's part of the committee's charge, and we've explained that to them, and it's part of your charge too. We ask you to do the same thing. Provide us with that feedback. If you think we haven't explained why something is being recommended, then we really haven't done our job, and you should ask us to explain it.
As you mentioned before, does your consulting firm, you only just, let me just get this question out. Do you have prior law enforcement experience that you can make a well-informed decision about what a police department's to do and not to do?
I have not been a police officer. I have not worked for a police department. I have done a lot of municipal reorganization studies, and so I feel that I'm the expert on municipal reorganization, that the current staff and the employees of the departments are the experts about police services in this community. And that's why we approach them.
So again, you will
We're going to do a staff meeting with the officers so that we can gather your input.
each department.
Yep. Yeah, with all the staff in the departments.
Is that including dispatchers?
Yeah, I mean, that's up to you guys, and I would think yes. Good.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. And this is a hope that we become one unit and we can develop as such instead of two small pockets or areas. Dream big, grow, and improve our town as a whole. That would be my hope.
That's a good hope. Good.
Can you tell us what other municipalities you've done police consolidation studies in the state of New York?
Most recently, the village of Hudson Falls and Fort Edward up in Washington County in conjunction with the county sheriff's office up there, and then also in the village and town of Saugerties. And we've also worked on police as a part of overall reorganization studies in Lake George, Saranac Lake, and a couple others that are longer ago.
What were your findings and what were the final results of your study?
The two police ones I'll speak about, they were very different, and it's different in every community, as you can imagine. In Hudson Falls, they initially started it with the idea of maybe dissolving the village police department. They decided that that wasn't a good option, and instead they pursued some options for better shared services between the two villages and the county, including a shared dispatching function with the county. So basically, they were moving towards transitioning their dispatch into the county 911. And then in the village of Saugerties and town of Saugerties, they did dissolve the village police department and merged it into the town police department.
Well, that's also happened in Hampshire,
Right.
and that didn't go well.
Sure. It is community by community, and in Saugerties, I'm not employed there, so I can't say, but from what I hear, it's gone fairly well.
What was the loss of jobs?
I was just let me just ask this one question. Was there an increase, decrease? If there's been an increase in efficiency, was there an increase in crime as well?
I haven't reviewed the crime statistics recently, but from what I gather, there wasn't an increase in crime. There was an elimination of one position, one of the chiefs who retired as the transition happened. There was a fairly large reduction in the village property tax levy after they implemented this. And I'm not saying that to try to say that this is the right answer here. I'm just explaining what happened in Saugerties.
So, but through all of these, there would be loss of jobs.
Not necessarily. So, as I mentioned, in Hudson Falls, the options did not involve dissolution of the police department. It involved more shared services and changes in the way that they did dispatching, and it didn't result in any loss of jobs.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no. Do you feel?
Well, you can see that on Low HUD, if anybody wants to read that. It actually raised the taxes.
Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, and I can imagine they're not very happy about that because that's not what this should be about. So, that's a good point.
Is there a possibility, if there is consolidation, that any change in positions could be handled by attrition as opposed to layoffs or firings? I don't know if that's happened in other.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that, if there's an option that looks attractive and the problem with it is that there's loss of employees and that's unacceptable, then the answer to that might be something like phase it in over time as people retire or as people leave the force or the department or whichever you're looking at. And the other option is transfer of function, that there are ways in certain circumstances for employees to be transferred from one municipality to the other to provide the service, but under a different municipality. Those are things that don't come without challenges, but they're options that could be viable under certain circumstances.
When will you come up with the options as to what we are going to choose?
That process starts next. We got to do our homework to understand the services, meet with the departments, and understand exactly what the services are and get their input, and then immediately start identifying options. And so, at our next public gathering like this, we will be having a lengthy discussion about the options we've identified and our early sense of what the pros and cons of those options are.
Can those options always change?
Yep. I mean, I think at the end of if we get to November and somebody throws an entirely new option that we haven't thought of out, we're going to be kind of judging in our heads, can we actually evaluate this in the time that's left in the study? So I urge you to think quickly if there are options that you want to make sure are incorporated here and to reach out to us quickly, because just thinking of it doesn't mean it's going to happen. You got to actually let us know that there's something you feel like we should look at. But then, I mean, right now, this is the part of the process where we're kind of working with a blank slate and trying to figure out what are the options that might make sense.
You might have covered this. I've heard consolidation, shared services, and dissolution. Are we also going to consider a merger?
These are terms that often get used interchangeably, but they don't always mean the same thing. And so, in our sense, the term dissolution is the one that everybody knows just because it's come up in communities, but it's a form of a merger. It's a merger by dissolution. It's a merger where one municipality goes away and its functions are merged into another municipality. So that's one of the things that we're going to look at. But we're going to look at lots of different permutations of merger. Another one is a consolidation where you take two things and you combine them into one new thing. And so that's different. Even though it sounds trivial, the difference, that's actually a pretty significantly different thing in New York State. And so that's another option. And then the third option, there's actually lots of different permutations of this. So we'll look at them all. Some of them get ruled out really quickly just based on legal requirements. This is one of the things that, when we make that list of, here are the options, and by the way, we're ruling out this option, one of the first things that will rule some options out is that they're just not legal in New York State. And so we will identify them. We will say, look, this might sound like a good idea, but under current New York State law, you cannot do this. And that's not to say that you're not free to somehow lobby Albany and try to change that, but in our experience, that doesn't really happen, at least not quickly, and so we'll move on to other options.
Thank you for sharing all your information with us tonight. And I think the consultant company is coming here with an open mind, and I hope that that our subcommittee, also our steering committee, stays open-minded to looking at all the facts after the interviews are conducted and all the facts are presented in a logical, rational way before we predetermine any outcomes. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Any questions from our committee? Okay, you've had your chance, and I think a lot of these have been very good questions, and I think really right where we should be at this point in the process. Good questions.
What does the town actually think about this? I mean, there's one representative here from the town. What does the town, why isn't the town ponying up some of the money here and have a combined investigation into what's going on here as far as consolidation?
That would be a beautiful thing, but it's not the way the state does it. It's on the state, and we're initiating the actual consolidation study. The town is participating 100%. But as far as the funds, I would, as a village resident, I would love it if you all shared. But the way that's set up by the state, the town doesn't really have that option.
And the town was a kind of what's called a co-applicant on the grant. They passed a resolution supporting the process and saying that they would engage in it. But the way that the grant works, one of the municipalities has to be lead. And in this case, it's the village.
Does the town have a say in what happens here in the village?
Does the town have a say as to what happens here in the village?
When it comes to a vote, no. If it's an act of the village, then it's village residents who have the final say. And so that's, again, like I described, the village dissolution process, which is one potential option in this whole study, is an act of the village because it's the village doing something, and then the village residents are the ones who vote. Do the town have a say? Yes. I mean, like the options that we're going to be investigating, part of the process is to first discuss them with the town, and then at some point, inevitably in these studies, there becomes a negotiation with the town and trying to figure out what would the town want to do if the village did this, what would the town want to do, and that can get tricky, but that's a part of what we need to do in this process.
I forgot to ask you before, but how much upfront money is required for this?
That's stretching my brain to remember. And I don't remember. I'm sure we can look at it and get that figure. 39? Yeah, I guess it's 39,000 is the upfront. Yeah.
It's a grant.
It's a grant, and so
You'll get some of that money back if you agree to the terms that are suggested.
that's the total budget, I believe. So of that, 50% is being covered by the grant already. And then if some of the options are implemented, then more of it would be covered by the grant, up to the point where the town's minimum commitment for this would be $3,900. The village's minimum commitment to this would be $3,900.
So the more they agree to the suggestions, the more money they get back.
Correct. But that's a part of why we need your input in this, because, what are the options that actually make sense here, and that's part of why there's public process in this. Yeah.
Just the $10,000 to $20,000 that we're talking about to get back, depending on what we accept, is nothing compared to what we're looking for. We're looking for 500, 800,000, $1 million. These are the savings we're dealing with, or money's coming in from the state. So that's why it was easy for us to go for the study. the $10,000 that we may not get back from the study, to me, is nothing compared. We don't consolidate. We share one or two services. That is still going to save us yearly a good amount of money. And the other biggest thing we're looking for on top of savings is efficiency.
Reduce taxes.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of what, in the end, keep in mind that the investments for a study or for, if you do have to do some implementation costs, and we'll talk more about that as we get to the end of the study, is the idea that these options, if they're good, one of the things that makes them good is that they could save money in the long term year after year. There was a question there.
Not so much a question as comment. Not to oversimplify, but if I own two houses, it does not cost me what one house cost me, even though they're both mine. So we have two governments for about 6,000 people. Just off the top of my head, with a little bit of logic, it seems like it should somehow work out cheaper. I mean, we're not a large place. We have a huge amount of land that can't be developed because it's not really ours.
Right.
And for a small house, one small house, it should be better than two small houses.
Yeah, and that's what we hope to answer through this is it and how much? So.
Where did the upfront money come from this?
The grant, I mean, that's the source of this.
What the other half?
The other half will come
20,000, where did that come from?
from the village's budget.
Where?
The village budget.
The general fund? This was a line item when it was budgeted when?
No, I believe probably contingency. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's a drawdown also, so, it will go into the next budget year.
Any other questions?
Has any forethought been given into how talk of dissolution will affect retainment and recruitment of our police department?
I hope that folks will understand that this is a study process that requires their input rather than kind of prejudging it before we've actually even gotten into that. So I understand that it raises concerns, and not just for the police force, but for people throughout the community. Part of the reason we're here tonight is to try to explain the process, try to put some of those concerns and fears at rest, and make people understand that we really think that this should be a community discussion about these options.
I mean, if I'm a fairly new officer with a relatively small amount of years here, I'm looking at other opportunities within the county. I wouldn't stay here.
Thanks for your comment.
Just one more question. You're talking about the grants. You're talking about the grants and combining the departments together, consolidation. It's going to cost to put these departments together.
Yep.
Where is that money coming from?
Two places. One is that the grant program that funds a study like this also has an add-on component that's for implementing the findings of the study. So the village and/or the town would be eligible to apply for a second grant to help pay for some of those implementation costs.
Guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed, but it's not guaranteed because you haven't decided if you're going to do any of them yet.
If it is decided, is that guaranteed?
It's not guaranteed, but I think I've worked with a lot of communities.
Even if you go along with it, it's still not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed. The other thing that can help cover those costs is the long-term savings that are identified for any option. So if there's an upfront cost of $10,000, but you're saving $5,000 a year, it's probably a pretty good investment of that initial $10,000.
But again, some of the departments, especially with the technology and the systems that they have now, if you're talking long-term, you have to always upgrade.
Yep.
That's going to cost.
But that's a cost that's true now, right? I mean, you guys have to upgrade.
Well, you have to upgrade, but what I'm saying is if you don't have that promise from that grant, that's going to be the taxpayers paying for it.
But again, true, but I think it is the taxpayers paying for it now. And so the idea is that if we can find some things that would help both departments and that would provide an opportunity to even just apply for that grant, are we, likely in a better place than we are now?
It's just nice to have a a promise on that. Yeah.
Right. Well, I hear you. I wish there was a promise, but I really think that in a lot of ways, and this is never a reason to do anything, but it's worth considering that the state has these grant programs because it feels that these kinds of conversations within communities are valuable, that they can end up with positive results. And so my sense and my experience is that when we identify something that the community wants, that it is a powerful case to be made up in Albany to fund implementation of that. Yeah, and this is one that will come up too, that one of the programs that the state has implemented in the last few years as they changed the law around municipal reorganization is an additional pool of incentive money. And this is annual recurring additional state aid to municipalities that implement consolidations on the kind of municipal level. These are not service consolidations, but municipal consolidations. And that is a big pool of money, and it's one that the communities that have done this process and have thought this through and have decided that they need to reorganize their municipality and have applied for it, have gotten it. And so that's one that I think needs to be on the back of people's minds, and we'll reiterate it as we get to those study options and talk about what it means for the community.
I would just like, though, with your study to have that included, if you're talking about the consolidation, especially police departments, the extra expenses that
Yes.
we have to go into.
Yes.
Just to give you an idea, as Tim said, of large money, just so we're clear, and speaking to Rob Rokel of the state, if we decide to consolidate the police, both the town gets $200,000 and the village gets $200,000. So it's $400,000, and that's not to pay for the reorganization. A majority of that money goes for the implementation when you're buying new vehicles because of your implementation, or throwing $100,000 to $300,000 into a new building or in addition to a building. So $200,000 goes to the town, $200,000 goes to the village, and that money is used for police. When we consolidate DPW, if we consolidate DPW, $200,000 for the town, $200,000 for the police. Those are one-time figures that we've been given by Rob Rokel. Now, as Tim had pointed out, the larger number that is a yearly offering at this time from the state, we thought it was a little higher, which we would have liked, but Robert Rokel had told us that it's between $800,000 and $1 million yearly incentive while the program is going on, which is why we want to look at it now and not 5 years. If it's not good for our community, we will not do it. But if it's good for our community and we can get an extra $1 million, and I believe it's 60%? 60%.
Even
80% of that 800,000 to $1 million has to go to reduce taxes. It can't go for an extra car or to a building. It has to go to specifically reduce taxes. So for those in Fort Montgomery that are concerned, which may, when you do the study, you're going to be surprised that it's not going to go from Highland Falls and Fort Montgomery and we reorganize and Fort Montgomery's taxes are going way up. Once Tim gets through the study, you're going to see that that's not the case. But if Fort Montgomery started here and Highland Falls was here, and because of the whole full reorganization, Fort Montgomery ended up here, 80% of the $800,000 a year has to go to lower that back down for both, so that both communities win. That's really why the village board was really looking at it. Just with the efficiencies, we're going to win. But these incentives that the state is offering at this time will, we've been knocking our heads, the town board's been knocking their heads. How do we reduce taxes? Our taxes are out of control. Our taxes are way higher than they should be. We've been looking, lower 5,000, lower 10,000. This is a program that can lower taxes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And that's why we're in on it. I'm sorry, Tim.
No, that's a good point.
Any of that money that comes from the state, can that be used towards payroll to offer buyouts and retirement incentives if you're going to reduce the workforce?
So the mayor mentioned two different pots. There's the $200,000 for each municipality that is a one-time thing, and the answer for that is yes. That can be a part of the implementation costs, and so it can be applied for as part of that grant. For the ongoing money, no, that's again, as the mayor said, for reducing property taxes.
Listen, I respect the fact of the study and what we're doing here. I think it's a great thing for the community. However, being a former town board member, when you're offered and promises are out there on grants and what you're going to receive, sometimes they fall under. And that sometimes sends my alarms off. That's why I question that, and I'm hearing you. I just hope it's a promise.
Sure. Understood. And I think, what I'll say is that let's get into this process. Let's examine this stuff. Let's look at the numbers. We feel like our job is to present it as clearly as possible what the facts are. And so one of the ways that we do that is we explain, as the mayor pointed out, there's really two reasons to do this stuff. It can create efficiencies, which create savings themselves, and it can tap into new state funding. And when we present the numbers to you, we try to present it so that you can see both of those things. So that if you are somebody who feels like we can't trust that, and that matters to me, then you can ignore those numbers and look at these numbers. But I think they're very important to have in here because there are a lot of communities that have seen this, and it can be a very big incentive. So,
How many communities have done this?
I would say probably a dozen in the last 3 years.
And what happens when those funds are done? Is every year the state going to be pushing money back into this?
So far, yes.
How long is that? How long is that?
I can't say exactly how much. Say again?
Is that forever? That state fund?
Nothing is forever. Nothing is forever. I mean, no one would guarantee that it's forever.
Is this something that is going to say, look, we're going to give you $800,000 a year, but it's going to stop in 10 years?
No, they say, and they've said this since the beginning, is that it's an annual increase in state aid. It's subject to budget reauthorization, just like every dollar that the state spends.
Forever, could last a year, could last 4 years.
Right, which is exactly why, as I said, when we present the savings, we present it with that and without that so that you can judge for yourself. Okay, is there more?
One more.
Okay.
Does also social service benefits for people that are getting government assisted, is that part of the study also? I mean, will the people from Fort Montgomery have to pay for somebody living in the village?
Good question. And those are long-term obligations of the municipality that those employees worked for, and they do not go away. Even if the village were to dissolve, any post-employment benefits like Social Security, like, retiree health care, whatever the village has, they would continue to get paid, and they would be paid out of if the village went away, it would still be the residents of the former village that are responsible to pay those until those are paid off. I think that answers your question. No.
I was talking about social services. I wasn't talking about. I wasn't talking about public employee benefits.
I mean, there isn't really a social services budget at the.
That's done by county?
Right.
But if I may, this will be my last question.
Okay.
I promise everybody, you brought it up.
Okay.
So if you do merge, there is the debt still behind from the village.
Yes.
Which has to be paid off by the village.
Yes, and that's a fact that, remember, this is one of those things that it's a cost now. So it's not a new cost, but it's one that the restructuring doesn't change who pays it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I did. And it's fair game because that's an important thing. It may not sink in right now, and that's okay because we talked about a lot of stuff right now. But as we move through this process, when we evaluate dissolution, that's one of the things we're going to call your attention to, is that just because you dissolve the village, if you chose to, doesn't mean that you can somehow avoid paying all the things that you owe to past employees. You still have to pay those. And so that's something that as we look at the financial impacts of dissolution as an option, we'll explain.
And that goes along with the unions, because that's what happens.
Right.
I think I'd like to remind people that as they're talking about this state money being bannered about, that comes out of our pockets too. So there's no free ride.
There's no free ride. That's true.
Tim?
Yes.
Just on the debt, as Tim stated, the village has approximately 10 million in debt. It's not all A fund, it's sewer and water. The sewer and water will remain in those districts. Just like the district in Fort Montgomery, District 2, is responsible for their costs, District 1 is responsible for its costs. And that will all be negotiated with the town when the consolidation process occurs. Understand that with that debt, with that several $1 million of debt, water, sewer, comes assets. We're not giving the water plant to the town. District 1 is selling the water plant to the town, and that will help pay debt. Same thing with the sewer. It's not just hand over the keys. The people of the village have been paying for the water plant and the sewer plant since we started. That's why village is formed, because of water and sewer. The villagers have been paying for it forever, so they're not going to walk away without anything. As far as the A fund debt, when we consolidate, when we negotiate with the town, we have other assets, vehicles, buildings, other things. They will all be priced out, and that will help go against our debt.
Yeah, and that's this is exactly the stuff that we will be looking at as we evaluate all this. You can see it's a lot of number crunching, it's a lot of data, and it eventually gets down to some kind of complicated concepts, which it shouldn't. I mean, things, this doesn't seem like it should be this complicated, but unfortunately it is. Part of that's the way that villages and towns got structured back in the day when the state authorized villages to be incorporated. It's all a mess, but that's our process over the next 6 to 12 months, is to try to unravel that mess and explain it in a clear way. Really? Okay, fine.
This is kind of serious.
I know, I agree.
What about like unfunded state mandates? That's always been a big problem for small municipalities.
I hate to say it, but this is not going to solve that problem. It's still going to be a problem that every local municipality has to deal with. If there is a benefit, it's that the municipality will have other means to reduce its costs through efficiency or through additional state aid that help offset the inevitable increases that are going to come from a bunch of different things, unfunded mandates, increased pension costs, all those things that are true no matter what happens with this study. So, okay. Have we exhausted the questions? I understand that it's serious. I appreciate that. But I also think, we've gone through a bunch of stuff, and I hope people's heads haven't overfilled on this. Jim?
Yeah. When would negotiate? Hi, Jim DeSalvo, 20 Villa Parkway. When would negotiations start with the town?
In a sense, they're always happening, right? This is a process that as we identify options, we're lucky to have a member of the town board on the committee to help us to weigh those options and understand the town's perspective on them. But as we identify options and confirm them through the public process in this study, then we start to talk about what it would take to make them happen. And at any point in this process, that could engage the town board to start to get their feedback. Okay, let me go here and then.
No, I commend you on a very clear presentation, and it is a study, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Very true. Thank you.
So the mayor was talking about when we consolidate. If we consolidate, does that mean that the governing body of Highland Falls is no longer, because we are an incorporated village, correct? Does that mean they are no longer how does that work?
That's a good question, and this comes back to the question about merge, consolidate, dissolve. These are all different things, and the answer to that question depends on which one you do. So there are lots of different options, and as we identify the options, we'll explain them, and I'll do one now just for example. Dissolution means what you just said. Dissolution, as the term kind of implies, is a corporate dissolution. The village is a corporation. Dissolution is the process of making that corporation go away. And so that corporation right now is represented by the village board. That's the governing body of that corporation. If the village dissolves, that governing board goes away. But there are other options that don't involve that are worth considering.
That is definitely one of the options.
Yes.
Okay.
Question in the back. You've been patient outside in the hallway, so you get to ask.
Thank you. It was answered before as part of the merger that it had to go to be voted on. If single departments for DPW or police, if they were disbanded singularly, does that have to be voted on, or is that something that can just be done with the village board?
Very good question. And, I don't want to make a misstep here, so I'm going to tell you the one I know for sure, which is police department. In New York state law and village law, if the village board chooses to dissolve its police force, that action is subject to a permissive referendum. So that means the village board can do it, but if a petition is circulated with enough signatures, then it forces a vote on the issue. So just be aware that's the process for police dissolution. I can't say off the top of my head DPW, and I wouldn't venture a guess. We'll look at it. Anyone else? Okay, sir.
Sure. Is there plans for an environmental impact study to be done if any of those dissolutions are requested? And is there funding for that?
I believe that it requires a short form review, and so I think it depends on the option, but it's certainly something that, depending on the option, could. And as we get to actual plans for implementation of any option, we'd identify that step in the process. Usually, in my experience, these have been negative declarations, so I don't see something in this process that would result in a full seeker review, but it's entirely possible, and as we get to the planning for implementation, we would look at that. Okay, it's getting very warm in here too, so maybe that's an incentive too to wrap if there are no other questions. Thank you all. I'm really encouraged by the participation. This is great. I really encourage you to continue to follow along on the website, come out to the future meetings, ask questions, suggest topics, whatever it is that you care to do through the website.
Last thing, on the next meeting, though, is it possible to have it at the library?
I think we can look at a bigger space. We kind of didn't know how much turnout would happen tonight,
Right.
so we guessed a little small, but we can work on that for next time. Ask questions on the website. I'm trying to get it up. Oh, it's back up here. http:// or just type in highlandfalls.rondoutconsulting.com.
There's a link on both the village and...
There is a link on both of the village and the town websites, I believe. I haven't verified that, but I think there is. And if there isn't, there will be very shortly, because we'll make sure it's true. Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Make sure to put your Post-it notes somewhere where we can get them. Thank you.